Welcome to Underworld UK, where Britain's darkest stories are brought to light. From the gritty streets of Gangland, London, Liverpool, Manchester and Birmingham, from Curtis Warren to the Cray twins to county lines and modern-day true crime, we cover everything. Bringing you new videos every week. Subscribe so that you'll be notified when the next video is put out.
By the age of 18, Curtis Warren was a fully fledged buck. His frame, broad and solid at 5'9", was built with muscle, his head like a bullet resting on a boxer's neck. He was the tough product of a tough neighbourhood. Fighting wasn't optional. It was survival, as natural and as necessary as breathing or sex. A Dutch detective, who would later play a role in his arrest, said, "Violence for him was a very common thing. He didn't think much about using it. When he discussed it, it was just like he was talking about the weather." In the rougher parts of Liverpool, violence wasn't shocking. It was expected. Then Chief Constable Ken Oxford once admitted, "I was appalled by the amount and extent of it when I first came to work on Merseyside." He added, "Mythology has it, and I exclude nobody from this, that the area is tough. It has the unfortunate effect that people feel they must react to this and be tough." More than half of all violent offences in the county were concentrated in one district, Toxteth. Among Warren's peers, there was one youth who stood out even more, Johnny Phillips. 2 years older, more powerful, and known for his violent, volatile temperament. He'd once been arrested for throwing petrol bombs at police during the riots. Even in the hardened streets of the Triangle, Johnny raised eyebrows. He was a time bomb, and together he and Warren made a formidable pair. One of the city's darker specialties was known as rolling. Gangs of young men would use local sex workers to lure their clients to isolated places. There, the victims would be ambushed, beaten and robbed. Sometimes, right in the act, caught in a car on a dark street, doors yanked open, belongings rifled through, dignity stripped away. So when Warren and Phillips spotted a girl standing alone beneath a streetlight, they didn't see a person. They saw an opportunity. She was young, pretty, selling herself to men each night, walking through rubble and broken glass in sharp heels and a tight skirt. She stood in the sodium glow of a street lamp, watching cars crawl by. But the city had changed. The riots had driven the punters away, the clubs were closing, the seamen were gone. Warren and Phillips cornered the girl. They ordered her to pick up a customer and steal his money for them. "We'll be back," they told her. 3 days passed before she saw them again, and they were just as mean, demanding their share. She didn't have it. "If you don't get our money, we'll slit your throat." A threat that would soon become reality. Warren and Phillips spotted her again, this time in a car with a man. They leapt out, smashing the window, and attacked the unsuspecting man with a wrench. As he tried to drive away, terrified, Phillips and Warren gave chase, ramming his car, not letting him escape. The man and the prostitute, against all odds, made it to a police station. They told the officers everything. For once, someone fought back. The 2 men were arrested, and in March of 1982 they stood trial in Liverpool Crown Court, charged with blackmail, criminal damage and theft. Phillips, the one said to be the prime mover, claimed it was all a misunderstanding. Warren stayed quiet, denying everything. Both were convicted. Phillips received 3 years in prison, Warren just 2. The judge, looking at the young criminals, said, "Men like you blackmail people they think will not go to the police. This unfortunate girl did, but for your youth, your sentence would have been much longer." It was Warren's first spell in adult jail. And in that cold, unforgiving world, he soon learned his place. He was low on the criminal pecking order. Here were the real villains: conmen, forgers, bank robbers, fraudsters, enforcers, men who had never worked a day in their lives, who couldn't live a straight life if they tried. But not all of them saw him as a threat. In Liverpool's criminal world, older men often acted as mentors. They welcomed new recruits, teaching them the score. And soon, Warren found himself rubbing shoulders with the big players, the ones making the city infamous for lawlessness. Meanwhile, On the very day that Warren was jailed, Chief Constable Ken Oxford stood before a row of journalists in a small conference room at Lancashire Police Headquarters near Preston. Oxford, though facing the press, felt a quiet relief. No questions about the riots. For the last 3 days, he had been presiding over the annual Drugs Forum, attended by Home Office mandarins, senior customs officers, and international crime experts. Now, it was time for the final day news conference. Oxford knew how to grab a headline. He had a message to deliver. He leaned forward, pulling his chair close to the table. There is no diminution of supply. The words were clear, and the key to the supply is the exchange of large sums of money. Chief Constable Ken Oxford didn't mince them. It is important that these people do not gain from their criminal activities, because at the heart of it all was money. A tidal wave of cash, crashing through the British underworld. The gold rush was on, and everyone wanted in. Drugs weren't just creeping in anymore, they were flooding the streets. From bustling cities to sleepy villages, they became as common as lager or crisps, and with every sale, demand only grew. There was LSD, tiny paper squares that warped the senses, inducing bright illusions and darker paranoia. Amphetamine, speed, fuel for endless energy and chatter. Cocaine, the champagne of drugs, a crisp white powder that sped up the heart and slowed down caution. Heroin, smoked or injected, bringing both euphoria and ruin. And then there was cannabis. Pot, grass, hash, ganja, cheap, everywhere. It made people giggle, then drift into a foggy, mellow high. Though these substances weren't new, the scale was modern production, global transport, communications technology. It all supercharged the trade. 500 pounds of coca leaves could become 500,000 on the streets of Europe, a 1,000% markup. Cocaine became the most profitable commodity on earth, and no one, no lawman, no gangster had seen anything like it. And in this new era, one city stood out above the rest. Liverpool. So dominant, in fact, that one senior customs officer called it the #1 UK centre of excellence for drug smuggling. At the heart of this rise, a rare alliance. Older white criminals, dubbed the Liverpool mafia, teaming up with black and mixed-race counterparts from Toxteth, known in court documents as the Black Caucus. A term, it must be noted, used strictly for this criminal network, not to be confused with the Merseyside Black Caucus, a group that fought against racism. But this unlikely criminal coalition was real, and it was powerful. From this union emerged one man, a young buck from the streets. Curtis Warren, the car thief, the bruiser, about to become something else entirely, one of the major drug brokers in all of Europe. Even as Oxford gave his warning, his officers on the ground already knew the truth. The stable door was open, the horse was gone. The Liverpool mafia. Not a hierarchy, not like the Cosa Nostra, but loose, flexible, and built on trade. It was a catch-all phrase, a name for white men, many now in their 60s, who'd been working the criminal circuit for decades. Some cooperated, some were bitter enemies, but they lived in the same world. And call it what you want, mafia or not, it was organized, and it was crime. Their roots went deep, back to the 1930s, the same era that birthed the Cray twins and the Richardson brothers in London. But these men, they built a different kind of empire. The London gangs were territorial, they controlled manners, ran rackets. The Crays ruled Bethnal Green. The Richardsons held South London, protecting nightclubs, running slot machines and cracking skulls. When borders were crossed, blood spilled. But Liverpool's empire? It would soon reach far beyond any street or manor. The Liverpool mafia men largely eschewed strong-arm gangsterism to pursue economic crime. In doing so, they established a form of loose syndicate, unlike anything seen before in Britain. Above all, they exploited the waterfront. Many had strong links with the city's miles of docks, working there or mixing with those who did. Always a trove of plunder and smuggling, Dockland came into its own during World War II, when black marketeering was rife. US forces stationed in the area were obliged to organize a special corps of soldiers to stop the ransacking of their stores, mainly for cigarettes. At the end of 1945, the report on the police establishment and the state of crime stated, Crime had increased 68.9% since 1938. The raids on the city, the Blitz, left many premises very easy to break into. Shortages of all kinds of food and clothing made it easy for thieves to dispose of stolen property and worthwhile to steal what before the war wouldn't have repaid the trouble or risk. Many such large-scale operations were detected and successful prosecutions resulted, but it was seldom possible to establish the guilt of the principal offender. By the 1950s, one extremely capable criminal had risen to prominence in Liverpool's underworld. He was a figurehead to many younger hoodlums, especially a gang based in the notorious Scotland Road area, who had all grown up together and ran as a team in later life. They would go on to be leading lights in the Liverpool mafia. According to legend, some of their number even faced down the Cray twins when they tried to muscle into Liverpool. Of course, such tales should be treated with caution. Every major British city has its Cray story, and it usually goes something like this. The fearsome twins arrive at the station, only to be met by the local hardmen, warned that they're not wanted, and put straight back on the next train out. In the Liverpool version, the two sides clashed at a pub on the East Lancs Road. A knowledgeable underworld source recalled, the police followed the Crays round wherever they went, but so did the city's underworld. The meeting didn't involve shooters, just baseball bats and blades. It was a bit of a chat, really. In another version, Reggie Cray was persuaded to leave Liverpool by a detective inspector called John Ralphson, armed with a revolver he'd been issued earlier that day for a bullion escort. One of the main figures of that era was an enterprising wide boy, known only here as the Main Man. He became a key organizer of robberies, fencing, and all manner of crimes. He would solve problems, said a source. He was associated with a family of brothers. He pointed them in the right direction, let them do the job, and took his cut later. But he never got his hands dirty or his collar felt. He was the paymaster. But even the Main Man wasn't untouchable. Once he let some people down badly. They thought he'd grassed them up. Two brothers walked into a pub he ran. One grabbed his arm, laid it on the bar, and the other chopped it with a machete or a meat cleaver. He needed stitches, deep ones. People who climbed aboard with him tended to end up very upset or locked up. Another elusive figure was to rise even higher, to become the major player in the Liverpool mafia. We cannot name him here for legal reasons, but we'll call him the Banker. Not a nickname he used, but for our purposes, it fits. The Banker was raised in Kirkdale and worked the docks as a young man. He and his crew used the opportunity to pilfer on a massive scale. By the 1960s, he'd amassed enough to move into small businesses and into a darker world of hijacking lorry loads of spirits and cigarettes. One story tells how they stole a trailer parked overnight in Bootle. They rolled in with their own tractor cab, unhitched the wagon, hooked up their unit, and drove out, waving to the night watchman. On another occasion, while burgling a warehouse over the water, one of the Banker's men crashed through a roof and was killed. To this day, said a source, he's never set foot back on the Wirral. Thinks it's an unlucky place. The Banker laundered his loot through pubs and clubs, ran a tight ship, and rarely let the law get close. He spoke softly, looked ordinary, but wore an aura of subdued menace. He seems innocuous, like your uncle stepped straight off the golf course, said a customs officer who had twice questioned him about serious crimes. He wears woolen jumpers and slacks, but he is, without doubt, the most unnerving person I have ever interviewed. They questioned him at a police station, an hour, in total, with his solicitor sat beside him. And for that entire 60 minutes he didn't say a word. No yes, no no, not even a no comment, nothing. Just a long, unwavering stare, right into the eyes of whoever was asking the questions. When the pressure mounted, he would glance, briefly, to the corner of the room, and then, slowly, turn his eyes back to the interviewer. Unshaken, unflinching, unforgettable. But even the Main Man and the Banker took a back seat to the most flamboyant Liverpool crook of his era, Tommy Tacker. Cummerford. You can chart the entire development of drug smuggling in Britain through Tommy Cummerford, said Ranald MacDonald of HM Customs National Investigations Service. He was probably the first major criminal to import every kind of illegal drug. Comerford, or Top Cat, nicknamed after the quick-witted cartoon character, was a big fleshy man with strands of hair combed over a bald crown, twinkling eyes, and a grin that never quit. In the Underworld, where charm, flash, and fearless rule-breaking are admired, he was a legend. An unreformed scallywag, cruising the Caribbean on the QE2 while signing on the dole, jetting off to five-star hotels while applying for a council flat, snorting coke with rock stars while claiming housing benefit. Even today, reported the Liverpool Daily Post in 1996, his notoriety brings a wry smile to the faces of the most experienced Liverpool detectives. Cummerford was affable, approachable, good-humoured, and unapologetically criminal. He was the first true high-profile drug dealer on Merseyside. Flash cars, cute women, and white lines on a glass coffee table. The Hollywood image had finally landed in Liverpool. Born in 1931, Comerford began his dishonest dealings in the 1950s. By the early 60s, he had earned enough respect and fear to star in Liverpool's version of the Cray story. According to legend, he stood calmly on the platform at Lime Street Station and politely told the twins to clear off. Like the banker, he invested in pubs and clubs, but the similarities ended there. The banker was ice. Tacker was fire. Cummerford's leap to criminal stardom came in 1969 with the infamous Water Street job. Over the August bank holiday weekend, he and his gang spent 2 full days tunnelling into a bank in Liverpool city centre from a bakery next door. They used thermal lances to slice through the steel doors of the strong room, the first British criminals ever to do so. They made off with £140,000. Clean, precise, professional. Later, Comerford was jailed for 10 years for what the judge called burglary at a counting house. The judge described the raid as top-level, professional, organised crime, carried out with the most modern, sophisticated equipment, and with all the planning and precision of a commando raid. But while Tacker sat behind bars, something seismic was beginning to shift, a tremor rumbling beneath Britain's criminal underworld, and the fault line was drugs. Until 1916, there were no specific anti-drugs laws in the UK. Then came the Defence of the Realm Act, outlawing cocaine and opium without a prescription. In 1920, the Dangerous Drugs Act followed. But even then, drugs, hard or soft, remained a fringe concern in British life, a whisper in the background, an occasional scandal in the Sunday papers. But that was all about to change. Cannabis, or hemp, was portrayed as a sense-numbing peril, used by black sailors and immigrants to tempt innocent white girls. Cocaine, it had enjoyed a certain vogue in the society circles of the 20s and 30s, while opium and its derivatives, morphine and heroin, were tied to the image of the inscrutable Chinaman, a faint air of mysticism, and of course, Sherlock Holmes. Even into the 1950s, most people in Britain still associated drugs with black people. The new immigrants arriving from the West Indies and Africa, or the artists of American jazz. Many of the top musicians, men like Charlie Parker, were hooked on heroin. Even the avuncular Louis Armstrong smoked cannabis for nearly all of his adult life. And the blues? The blues had always had its drug songs, songs that echoed the hard, unvarnished truths of ghetto life in urban America. Then came the crossover into the mainstream, and paradoxically it came through the counterculture, the beat movement of the 1950s, the permissive hippie scene that followed in the 60s, an explosion of foreign travel, a newly wealthy population, and a wave of American servicemen returning home, with stories of cannabis and heroin from Vietnam. Drugs became a staple of the white rock scene. The Beatles experimented, the Rolling Stones indulged, Jim Morrison and Jimi Hendrix died. Lou Reed rapped about buying heroin on a New York street corner in Waiting for the Man. Back in England, the working-class mods had their pills and their reefers. The psychedelic drugs of California's counterculture added something new. A horizon, mind-expanding and uncharted. Britain reacted. In 1967, it set up regional drug squads. Then came the Dangerous Drugs Act. Doctors were banned from prescribing heroin and cocaine. They also had to notify the Home Office of anyone known or suspected of being addicted, said Ron Clark, a former police inspector who researched drug use extensively. Overnight, treatment for drug users was removed. We saw a spike in burglaries at chemists and drugstores. There was a hue and cry from police and drug enforcement agencies. But we weren't trained for this. We weren't skilled to deal with addicts. That led to the Misuse of Drugs Act in 1971. That was when we really started policing drugs in this country. The result? Almost overnight. Britain had a heroin problem. Illicit dealers stepped in to fill the void that legal prescriptions had left. The first major seizures happened in 1971. Most of them traced back to the Golden Triangle, that wild and mountainous borderland where Burma, Laos and Thailand collide. By the mid-70s, British gangsters had moved in. They found only scattered resistance, a few hippies and chancers. Soon, the underworld of London, Glasgow, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham put down their sawn-offs and picked up snapbags and scales. Freewheeling charmers like Howard Marks, the Oxford-educated cannabis king, were pushed aside. Or as Guardian crime reporter Duncan Campbell put it, the headbands gave way to the head cases. Then in 1979, the unthinkable happened. Peter Bennett, a customs officer, was shot dead in London docklands on a cannabis case. It became a symbol, a signal that things had turned darker. Drugs were nothing new in Liverpool. Back in the 1950s, it accounted for 1/3 of all dangerous drug prosecutions. The city, with its Caribbean and West African ties, was believed to be the biggest port of entry for marijuana. The press had dubbed it the cannabis capital. By the late 70s, the city's senior white criminals were ready, poised, prepared. They had the nerve, the contacts, the know-how, and the absence of morals. The heavy white criminals saw what was going on, said a former Liverpool detective. They were ahead of the game. In the past, top-tier robbers and burglars thought drug dealers were flaky, unreliable. But Liverpool had a smuggling tradition, and they caught on fast. One gang smuggled hash hidden in cocoa beans from Nigeria. Another flew first class to 5-star hotels in Miami, the Bahamas, Jamaica, to arrange shipments of cannabis. On one occasion, 2 members flew into Heathrow, and rather than wait 2 hours for a connecting flight, they paid £225 for a taxi back to Merseyside. In 1981, 10 members of a gang were caught unloading cannabis at Seaforth docks. Most of them were unemployed dockers. And in another case, a figure known only as the main man was named as a central player in Liverpool's drug trade. He was soon in the thick of it. He recruited 4 dock workers to pick up a cannabis consignment from North Africa, but they were arrested as they went to collect the drugs from a Liverpool quayside. Cummerford and 7 others were flush enough to post sureties totalling £120,000 to get bail, on condition they surrendered their passports and reported to a police station twice a day. Their trial at Liverpool Crown Court was the best show in town. Every morning, Cummerford held impromptu press conferences where he'd swap quips with reporters, opine on legal issues, and muse about life. He revelled in the attention. He took a particular shine to one short-skirted female journalist, whom he dubbed Legs. Asked what sentence he thought he'd get if found guilty, he cracked, "I've had a word with the judge and told him there's no way I'm going to accept a community service order." In the event, he pulled 7 years, later reduced to 4 on appeal. This time, his spell inside coincided with a boom in the use of heroin, which started to pour into the country from a new cultivation zone, the so-called Golden Crescent, spanning Iran, Iraq and Afghanistan. It soon became more available than cocaine, and the street price dropped by more than 1/5. Heroin was regarded, even by the people who sold it, as a vermin drug. Hooking addicts in a prison of despair. Usually sold as a brown powder, it starts life as the milky sap of the opium poppy. The sap is collected, dried to form a gum. The gum is washed and becomes opium. Opium contains 2 pain-killing alkaloids, codeine and morphine. The latter is further refined to create diamorphine, or, as the streets know it, heroin. Initially, most heroin users feel nauseous. They often vomit. But those who persevere experience feelings of relaxation, warmth and well-being. Nothing matters. They feel wrapped in cotton wool. Once that has passed, the user can interact normally, but reality will have a dreamlike quality. There are 2 main risks: overdose and dependence. The Liverpool barons did not give a toss. One of the first indications they had moved into the trade came in September 1983, when customs officers, after 6 months of surveillance, broke up a crew running loads through the docks at Liverpool and Dover. They found cannabis and heroin hidden in a container of cocoa beans. The leader, a haulage contractor from Kirkby, was jailed for 12 years. From the day he was released from his cannabis smuggling sentence, Tacker raised the stakes to a whole new level. He was soon organising supplies of heroin, cocaine, cannabis, amphetamines and LSD in a web stretching from his Liverpool council flat to Colombia, the USA, Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, Germany, Italy and Holland. Something unheard of was happening. For the first time, a British criminal had forged links with nearly all the world's major sources of drug cultivation and manufacture. Clearly, Cummerford could not have done it alone. He had been in prison. Someone had been very busy. Using the city centre Holiday Inn as his office, without the staff knowing, Tacker built a team, including his daughter's boyfriend, Dean Yardy, and Michael Wilding, a slim, 34-year-old Liverpudlian with a drooping moustache and 17 previous convictions. Their other base, a second-floor flat in South Liverpool. The council paid the rent, £27 a week. Less than a mile away was Treetops, the luxurious bungalow where Comerford really lived, with his wife Teresa. Regular visitors to the council flat included a US Army sergeant who ordered large quantities of drugs to sell to fellow servicemen stationed in West Germany. One run consisted of 1,000 dots of LSD, enough to trip out an entire garrison. Here we go. For Christmas 1983, he took his wife on a £5,000 cruise to the Caribbean and New York, aboard the Queen Elizabeth II. True to form, he submitted an insurance claim on his return, £11,500 for suitcases he had lost while at JFK Airport. In May 1984, Comerford was placed under surveillance by the No. 1 Regional Crime Squad based in the Northwest. Officers arrested one of his runners with a package of cannabis after a high-speed chase through Liverpool. 6 weeks later, police were tipped off. Comerford would be flying from Stuttgart to Heathrow. They staked out the airport. Tacker loomed into view as he strolled through the green nothing-to-declare channel, carrying 2 suitcases and a duty-free bag. Yardy was there to meet him. As they walked to a car, they were arrested. Inside one case, half a kilo of heroin. In the other, 20,000 worth of sterling, US dollars, Swiss francs, German marks, and Portuguese escudos. Wilding was arrested 3 weeks later in possession of heroin and a gun. Resentful at the way he had been treated by Comerford, he blabbed about the entire operation. Mickey was simply a dog's body to them, said the detective. He was never given any credit and was, in his eyes, treated very badly. He took all the risks and got very little in return. While he received just small amounts of cash, Tacker received all the riches. Once he carried out a sting on a dealer from Stoke-on-Trent, whom he met in a Liverpool wine bar. It netted £20,000 worth of cannabis resin for Comerford. Mickey got just £900. Comerford, 53, and Yardy, 30, were charged with possessing heroin worth £1 million and conspiracy to import drugs. Comerford was also accused of trying to bribe one of the arresting officers, offering him £15,000. Shortly before the trial began, police were warned there was a £20,000 Underworld bounty on Wilding's head. The case was moved to the Old Bailey for greater security. The star prosecution witness was kept at various police stations and safe houses, moved regularly, giving evidence during specially arranged early morning hearings. Thomas Comerford was a man with 2 faces, said Poole, opening the Crown's case in November 1985. To the local authority, he was a high-priority council house applicant. On the other hand, he was a man with a Bank of Ireland account, in the false name of Thomas Curry, through which nearly £2,000 passed in a year. The syndicate was international. Wilding told how he would travel to Europe, strap bags of heroin to his body, using crepe bandages and sticking plaster before flying back to England. He admitted conspiracy to supply heroin and other drugs and possession of a firearm and ammunition. He was jailed for 5 years. I take into consideration that your actions have placed you at considerable risk for years to come, said the judge. Neither Comerford nor Yardy gave evidence. They were found guilty of the drugs offences, though Comerford was acquitted of bribery. Judge Francis Petre sentenced him to the maximum, 14 years. Yardy was given 10 years. Bartlett, 4. Tacker's good cheer did not desert him. As he was being led to the cells, he turned to the judge and said, "Merry Christmas, Your Honour." The Liverpool mafia learned a lesson from Comerford's downfall. He had exposed himself too much, got his own hands dirty. Mistakes the banker would not repeat. Many believe he and his associates were now setting up one of the most comprehensive and successful smuggling syndicates ever seen in this country. They would be assisted by a remarkable alliance with a network of black drug traffickers from Toxteth, labelled by police as the Black Caucus. In time, this unique black-white collaboration would be headed by Curtis Warren. Before the riots, each group would keep to their own little section, but afterwards they realised there was more money to be made by joining forces, said a Liverpool solicitor who has represented many major criminals. Initially it was the Blag's armed robberies that they worked on, but then they moved into drugs. Liverpool 8, for the right reasons or not, has always been associated with drugs, and there has always been a market for them there. The white lads realised this, and teamed up with the blacks, who were already established. The whites were able to provide the money to fund bigger and more regular deals. A brighter, more ruthless type of criminal emerged.